I had Nell's sister Bree in political theory class, very smart family. And Nell is working in the arts. We've got a great range of people with careers across different fields and whose majors in college sometimes related directly to what they did afterwards in terms of giving back and social impact, because all of them have that in common. And sometimes they had no apparent connection, but that's what the liberal arts is. It's not pre-professional. It's part of the beauty and spontaneity of it. You can do anything with a liberal arts degree. Nell was a drama and theater and an English literature major here at the college. And that very definitely ties into what she does right now at the Pig Iron Theater. She also, right after college, got a Watson Fellowship, 2011, 2012, and was able to study the sociological, cultural, and political implications of baby names in seven different countries on this. And one of her favorite recollections is that she learned the word in Zambian is Tikambenji. It's a name that's given to babies who are a surprise to their parents. The name literally translates to, what is there to say? Now, Tikambenji. So my nickname as a child was Benji. And I was wondering, like, what does this mean about me? Did my parents spend some time in Zambia? What? So after the Watson, thank you. After the Watson, Nell came back to Philadelphia and started working in the arts, freelancing at first. She worked at the Wilma Theater, and now is the Associate Artistic Director at the Pig Iron Theater, which is a fabulous theater. Nell's going to talk a lot about the connections between the liberal arts, between community, and between theater, which is something that's very important to us at Swarthmore and at the Lang Center. Earlier, I spoke about the power that a liberal arts education has to show us connections and interconnectedness, to show us how much of the world we did not build, without denigrating what we have done with our own agency, with our own accomplishments. The liberal arts can show us, when you read in history, when you read in literature, when you read in sociological studies, when you read across the curriculum, you start to realize how much we rely on what others have done before us, and therefore, by implication, how much we have to give back. And that's something I think that Nell is going to flesh out in her talk about, in her account about community theater. Nell Bang-Jensen.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. It's really an honor to be here. I was remembering the other day that actually this summer between my junior and senior year at Swarthmore, I received a Eugene Lang Summer Initiative grant, and as a result had a stipend to support me as I wrote and produced a show on the Philadelphia Fringe Festival. So I realized in a sort of haphazard way, Eugene Lang is the person to celebrate or blame for my life in the arts today. So today I'm going to talk about my artistic practice. As Ben said, I'm a theater director and creator in Philadelphia, currently the Associate Artistic Director of Pig Iron. And I want to start by talking about our perceptions of who an artist is that I carried with me for a long time. I think we often have an idea in our culture that an artist is someone like Samuel Beckett here, who works in a Parisian cafe and looks a certain way, that there's someone who works in isolation, usually at 3 a.m. because they can't stop writing, that they're separate from our society, they're often a recluse, that they have a singular vision, and from planning to execution they do it all alone, and that they are artist-brained. And so in the theater community, and I imagine many other artistic communities, people sometimes say something along the lines of, oh, that person's such an artist. And usually it's meant a little bit disparagingly. Usually it means they have vision, but perhaps they're late to things, or they don't respond to emails, or they have other things going on in their mind. And also that an artist is starving definitely goes along with this stereotype. I went to a high school in Burlington, Vermont that had a great theater program, but had very different values than the kind of work I create today. I remember having a callback for my high school musical where the director lined us up by height to determine who would get the role, because she felt that the lead woman couldn't be taller than the lead man, and that was how she made her decisions. So coming to Swarthmore, the definition of what theater was completely blew my mind. I learned that the idea that we could make a play that hadn't existed before and not start from a script, but from the people in the room and their ideas and interests was brand new to me. This is actually a photo from my senior company production of Metamorphoses in 2010, happening in the Free career theater right downstairs. I realized I loved theater for it being a communal experience, that it brings people together. Having people all turn their attention to the same thing at the same time, as we're doing now, is increasingly rare in our society as we all are getting different news sources and different kinds of media. That rather than being separate from society, theater can reflect on, interrogate, and challenge it. The best theater pieces I see, there's a combination of recognition. You say, oh, I know that feeling, or oh, I have empathy. And it can also unsettle our certainties, giving us the opportunity to think about things that we may not in our daily lives or know that we need to. I realize theater can be collaborative. In our senior company productions, much to our dismay at times, we did not have a director. We all had to create it together. And I realized that actually what I loved about theater is it's an opportunity to explore and analyze complicated human dynamics, that we get into the nitty-gritty of moments between people, what they're saying underneath their words, what they're saying in their interactions between each other. So I began thinking about this juxtaposition between our perceptions of who an artist is and then what I loved about theater. And I realized that there were some discrepancies. And I thought about if we value what's on the right side in our theatrical experience, that maybe we need to change the skills of what we're asking for in the artists who are making work. I realized that my own understanding was very limited in terms of what art was when I went on vacation in Morro Bay a few years ago. And I'm sure we've all had the experience of arriving at a place only to find that it is not quite like the Airbnb or the online description. And I was staying at a bed and breakfast run by this woman in her 80s. And in the room, she decided it would be a tribute to her trip to Paris she had taken in the 1980s. And there were Eiffel Towers everywhere. She had a wall of keychains saying, "I love Paris." And in the bathroom, from the floor to the ceiling, it was papered with images of her and her late husband on their vacation there. It felt very intimate to be showering in front of their photos. And I was sort of poking fun at her in this idea, and the friend I was with stopped me and said, "You know, this is her art." And I thought a lot about that, and I thought about how she actually had created a very specific environment for us to inhabit. And I thought about architects and the way they use artistry in designing buildings, or scientists in their petri dishes, or a stay-at-home parent who wants a certain spice jar to be arranged because they have a particular aesthetic. And that's not to say that artists, that training doesn't matter, or natural ability or talent don't matter, but it is to say that maybe the key difference is actually the ways in which that artistry manifests, not the person doing it. I realized also theaters have a problem because by defining who an artist is so narrowly, it means certain people haven't historically felt welcome in their spaces. So I want to give you an example of a Broadway audience. There's many different art forms and forms of theater, too, happening in our country that just don't get a lot of funding, but I'm going to look at the highest funded commercial one and just tell you about the average Broadway ticket buyer. So the average Broadway ticket buyer, 67% of Broadway audiences are females, 80% are white. The average age is 44 years old. The average cost of a show is $100. And that's from 2015 to 2016, but things haven't changed that much. If you go to a major regional theater in Philadelphia, I would say actually 44 is on the younger end of the age spectrum. That really, if you look around the audience, you will see a sea of white hair. And I love those audiences, and I'm so glad they come to our theater. But recently, many theaters have been looking around saying, okay, what happens when these people aren't here anymore? They're the ones who come to our shows, and they're the ones who fund our theaters, so we need to start paying attention to other people. So community engagement is a very popular term in theater right now. My pet peeve with it is that often it's disguised as what I think of as audience development. So people often use community engagement as a term which really just means how do we get younger and more racially diverse people in the doors. So to me, community engagement exists on a spectrum. There's a small move, like, okay, maybe we get people to the show by having conversations about the themes of the show, or a photography exhibit outside. That's one end of the spectrum. On the other side of the spectrum, you have theaters are starting to say, what are the needs of our community, and how can our theater skills serve them? Not come to us, you should come to our doors, theater is good for you, but how can we actually serve the community that we're part of, which is our responsibility as a nonprofit. I want to give an example of mixed blood theater in Minneapolis. So like many arts organizations, they're in a very rapidly gentrifying neighborhood, and they're actually in an old firehouse, as you can see. So a few years ago, they realized they were getting great attention from the press. People from all over Minneapolis were coming to their shows. And they realized the people the least likely to attend one of their productions were the people living in their zip code. And so they thought, okay, how do we change this? And they said, okay, price. That could be one barrier to accessibility. We'll make our shows free to anyone who's in this zip code. So they did that, and they had some people come, and they said, okay, we did it. That was it. We got price down. They're coming. This is great. And then the next show, they did the same thing, and they said, okay, anyone in this zip code gets in for free. And almost no one came. And so they started doing focus groups saying, you know, it was free. Why didn't you come? And they said, well, yeah, we saw King Lear there, and we just weren't that into it. And that's not to say that King Lear cannot be accessible and relevant and engaging, but it is to say that why are they saying you should come here, as in theater being eat your spinach, instead of saying what's around us and how can we serve you. So Mixed Blood started looking what was actually in their neighborhood, and there were health clinics, there was a hospital nearby, and they started talking to them about what are people in this neighborhood talking about. And a big question at the time was vaccination. So they started working with public health clinics in that area to develop skits and plays and had gifted facilitators to help dialogues about this issue. So Mixed Blood Theater in Minneapolis still does their productions of King Lear, but they also have this other component that's actually serving the neighborhood that they're a part of. And that's the kind of theater work I'm really interested in right now. There's this idea that you're not making work for a community, you're making work with a community. So this is a rehearsal photo from a show I was a part of a few months ago. There were 87 Philadelphians in it, and it's just an example of how I really like to work on pieces where the people on stage looks like the city that we're a part of. I'm going to talk a little bit about a few other projects I've done where I've tried to emulate these values. One was a show called Practice Wedding I did at the Painted Bride Arts Center last year. As someone in my late 20s, I have been attending a lot of weddings recently and began realizing how they really were just a performance. There's often timing really matters. People have rehearsals for their first dance. There's a whole sound design to make sure that people can hear the vows. And so I interviewed Philadelphians about their experience with weddings and their relationships and what that ceremony and ritual meant to them. And then I staged a wedding at the Painted Bride that was a communal experience where audience members were on tables and we married these two women, and a few people thought it was real, just as a way of kind of examining this ceremony. A piece I did at Pig Iron, where I'm the associate artistic director, was called A Period of Animate Existence, and that title came from the dictionary definition for the word life. And it was about climate change. We were inspired to make it based on the stories of lawsuits where you have climate change activists who are asking children to sue the federal government for how they've ignored this issue. So we built a play not to say that climate change is real or bad because that messaging has gotten across loud and clear and people still aren't listening, but to start saying, okay, how do we mourn as a society when we know that this is coming? And what are the unnameable emotions that knowing extinction is coming brings up? This was a piece called Conception that went up just earlier this month, in which we had women talk about their relationship to the word choice. There was a woman with Down syndrome and her mother who spoke about their relationship. There was a woman who had had a partial birth abortion a few years ago that is actually now illegal, the procedure she had that had saved her life. I'm trying to find projects that are using theater to amplify the voices of others and think about my skills as a practitioner that can help them. The project I'm engaged in right now, which I don't have photos of yet because it hasn't happened, is called the Caregivers Project. And I'm looking around Pig Iron's Kensington neighborhood, and I saw many signs for home health aides, a caregiver support group, and began thinking about the relationships that form between people that often begin as financial transactions when you hire a nurse to care for an elderly, and it often requires complex navigation of race differences, class differences, and very intimate acts of bathing and feeding another human being. So with these community partners and with caregivers who work for them, we're creating a theater piece that's going to happen in June at Pig Iron as a way of bringing our neighborhood together. I think what the liberal arts did for me at Swarthmore and beyond is help me think not only about incorporating other disciplines into what I'm creating, working with climate change activists or sociologists to create the content of a piece, but also the way that we're making it and the structures that are at play. I think a lot about the values being expressed by my work, the false binaries that are created of who is an artist and who is not, and how in order for theater to survive, we need to be expanding that definition. I think a lot about this woman in Morro Bay and how I want to give a platform to people like her and someone who's not, like our perception of an artist, separate from society but deeply entrenched in it, and who actually designed a space that invited imagination just as the theater should. Thank you.